Welcome back to Sleep Storyteller, where every night is a new adventure, and every story is a journey into the unknown. I'm so glad you're here, ready to relax, unwind, and let the gentle sound of rain guide you into a peaceful slumber. As we begin tonight's story, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the world outside fade away. Remember, this is your space, a place to let go, to dream, and to find the calm you need. If you're ready for tonight's story, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below sharing what helps you relax most at night. Now, let's begin. The Crystal Shadows, the village of Ilmaris lay hidden beneath a veil of mist, nestled in the valley between two towering mountains. The people who called it home were known for their quiet lives and their reverence for the earth and sky. They lived in harmony with the land, cultivating the fields, fishing the rivers, and weaving the stories that had been passed down for generations. But there was something more, something the villagers rarely spoke of, something that had lingered in their hearts, buried deep beneath the surface of their peaceful existence. It was a secret, one that had been whispered only in the shadows, in hushed tones, as if afraid the very mention of it might awaken something long forgotten. For generations, the villagers had been bound to the Crystal Shadows, a mysterious force that had shaped their lives, their dreams, and their fates. But what the Crystal Shadows were, no one could truly say. Some believed they were a blessing, others a curse, but no one dared to speak too openly of them, lest they draw the attention of the ancient power that lingered just out of reach. In the heart of the village, at the edge of a quiet grove, there stood a small house with a thatched roof and a stone fireplace. This was where Eliana lived. She was a young woman, no older than 20, with dark hair that tumbled in loose waves around her shoulders and eyes that shimmered with the mystery of the world around her. Eliana had always felt a strange pull toward the secrets of the village, a pull that had grown stronger in recent months. She had heard the whispers, felt the weight of the shadows that seemed to cling to her thoughts when she was alone at night. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the valley in a soft, golden light, Eliana stood at the edge of the grove, gazing out at the forest that stretched beyond the village. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the quiet hum of the world around her seemed to settle deep into her bones. But there was something else in the air tonight, something she couldn't quite place. It was as if the wind itself was speaking. Carrying a message just beyond her understanding, she closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her, and for the briefest moment, the world around her seemed to shift. The rustling of the leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant sound of the river, all faded away, leaving only a profound silence. In that silence, Eliana heard it. A whisper, soft and elusive, like the call of something ancient. Eliana, her heart skipped a beat. She opened her eyes, her breath shallow, but there was no one in sight. No one but the trees, the fading light, and the endless sky. Yet the whisper lingered, like an echo of something she had heard before. Something deep within her stirred. Eliana, the voice was clearer now, and though it was soft, it held an undeniable weight, an ancient power, beckoning her. She felt an unfamiliar compulsion, a need to follow the voice, to discover its source. It wasn't fear she felt, but something akin to recognition, as though the voice had always been with her, calling her back to something she had long forgotten. Turning toward the heart of the grove, Eliana took a hesitant step forward. Her feet seemed to move of their own accord, pulling her deeper into the shadows of the trees. The path ahead was dim, the sunlight filtering through the thick canopy above, casting everything in a soft, silver light. She moved forward, her every step feeling more certain, more drawn to whatever it was that called her. The trees began to thin as she walked, and before long, she found herself standing before a large stone. It was unlike any she had ever seen. The surface shimmered faintly, as though it were covered in a layer of dew, but Aliana knew it wasn't dew. It was something else, something more. The stone pulsed with a quiet energy, almost as if it were alive. She reached out to touch it, her fingers trembling slightly. The moment her skin made contact with the stone, she felt a jolt of energy course through her, as though the very essence of the stone was alive within her. The sensation was overwhelming, but not painful. It was as if the stone were unlocking something within her, something she hadn't known existed. The world around her seemed to blur, and she staggered back, her breath quickening. The air grew thick with a strange, heavy energy, and she could hear the whisper again, this time louder, closer. "Aliana, you have been chosen." Aliana's heart raced, but she didn't pull away. She was drawn to the voice, the call that seemed to reverberate in her chest. She closed her eyes again, and this time, the whisper was no longer just a sound, it was a presence, a force that surrounded her, that filled her very being. She could feel it in the air, in her blood, in the depths of her soul. When she opened her eyes once more, the stone before her had changed. It was no longer just a stone, it had become something more, something otherworldly. The surface had cracked, revealing something hidden within. Glowing, pulsing with an inner light, was a crystal, clear and brilliant, with an otherworldly shimmer that seemed to dance in the dim light of the grove. She reached out to touch it, her fingers trembling with anticipation. As soon as her hand made contact, the crystal began to glow brighter, and the air around her seemed to hum with energy. The whispers grew louder, and in that moment, everything shifted. The world around her seemed to bend and warp, and the forest faded away. Aliana was no longer standing in the grove. She was somewhere else, somewhere beyond the limits of the world she had known. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling shadows and 1,000 stars that shimmered like jewels. The ground beneath her feet was made of smooth stone, as though she stood in a place that existed outside time itself. In the distance, she saw a figure, a silhouette, tall and imposing, standing in the shadows. The figure was shrouded in a cloak of darkness, and Aliana couldn't make out its features, but she felt its presence, felt its gaze upon her. "Aliana," the voice whispered again, now a calm, steady tone that echoed through the endless space. "You are the one who will awaken the crystal shadows. You are the one who will restore what was lost." Aliana's heart pounded in her chest. The words echoed within her, reverberating in her mind. She had no idea what it all meant, but she knew one thing for certain: her life had just changed forever. Aliana stood in the vast, shadowed space, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the voice that had called her here. The figure in the distance remained shrouded, its presence like a weight pressing down on her chest. She could feel the energy crackling in the air, thick and heavy, as if the very fabric of reality was being stitched together around her. The crystal in her hand pulsed with an otherworldly glow, its light shimmering in the darkness. It was warm to the touch, almost alive, as though it were aware of her every movement. The whispers she had heard earlier seemed to fade, replaced by a deep silence that filled the space like the calm before a storm. Every breath she took seemed to echo through the vast expanse, magnified in the stillness. She looked around, taking in the strange landscape that stretched out before her. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and cold, like stone, and it stretched endlessly into the distance. Above her, the sky swirled with colors she couldn't name, shades of violet and indigo, swirling and shifting like liquid, as though the stars themselves were alive, watching her. The figure in the distance shifted, its form coming into sharper focus. It was tall, impossibly tall, with a cloak of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. Aliana's heart raced, a mix of fear and curiosity flooding her veins. Who, or what, was this being? And why had it brought her here? The figure took a step forward, and with each movement, the ground beneath Aliana seemed to tremble. It was as if the very air itself recoiled in the presence of the figure, bending to its will. Aliana swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain still, her fingers tight around the crystal. She had no idea what was happening, no understanding of this place, but she knew, somehow, that she was meant to be here. The figure's voice rang out, deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. Aliana, her name. She flinched, but she didn't move. The voice wasn't threatening, but it held power, ancient power, a force that reached deep into her bones. It felt as though it was not just speaking to her ears but to her very soul, awakening something that had lain dormant for years. You have been called for a reason. The crystal shadows have chosen you. Aliana opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, the crystal in her hand began to glow brighter, casting flickering shadows on the ground. The light from the crystal reflected off the smooth stone beneath her, creating strange patterns, like intricate webs of light that pulsed and shifted with each heartbeat. The figure stepped closer, its cloak swirling like smoke, and for the first time, Aliana could see its face. It was not a face like any she had ever seen. It was shifting, changing, constantly in motion, like a mask made of shadows, with features that flickered in and out of focus, never staying the same for long. Its eyes, though, remained constant, two deep, endless pools of blackness that seemed to absorb all light, like twin abysses, staring into her very being. "Do you understand?" the figure asked, its voice soft but commanding. The crystal shadows are not just a force, not just a legend. They are a living memory, a power older than time itself. They have been waiting for you. Waiting for someone who can unlock their true potential. Aliana's throat was dry, and she took a shaky breath. The words felt heavy, almost too much to bear. She had heard the stories, fables whispered around campfires, tales of the crystal shadows that had been passed down through generations. They were said to be the remnants of an ancient power, a force that had shaped the world before the dawn of civilization. Some believed they were the essence of the earth itself, the embodiment of the land's deepest secrets. Others thought they were a curse, a reminder of a forgotten past that had brought ruin to those who dared to seek them out. But now, standing in this strange, shadowed place, Aliana realized that the stories were only half-truths. The crystal shadows weren't just myths, they were real, and they had been waiting for her. She could feel it in the air, in the way the energy around her seemed to hum with life. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she was certain of one thing: she was the key to unlocking the secrets of the crystal shadows. The figure before her tilted its head, its gaze never leaving her. You have always been connected to them, Eliana. The crystal you hold is only a small fragment of their true form. It has been hidden away, kept from the world until the time was right. That time is now. Eliana's mind raced, her thoughts a tangled web of confusion and understanding. She had always felt different, always known that there was something about her life that didn't quite fit with the world around her. Now, it seemed that this feeling had a name, a purpose. She had always been destined to come here, to hold this crystal, to step into the shadowed world that had been waiting for her. But why me? Eliana whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast emptiness. Why was I chosen? The figure's eyes glinted with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, a mix of sadness and knowing. Because you are the last of your kind, Eliana. The last to carry the blood of the ancient ones. You are the only one who can restore balance to the crystal shadows. But you must be willing to sacrifice everything. You must be willing to embrace the darkness within you, to face the shadows that lurk in your heart. Eliana's breath caught in her throat. Sacrifice. The word echoed in her mind, and she felt a chill run down her spine. What did it mean to embrace the darkness within her? What did she have to lose? The figure stepped closer still, its presence overwhelming. The choice is yours, Eliana. Will you awaken the crystal shadows and restore the balance, or will you let them remain lost, forgotten in the depths of time? Eliana stared at the figure, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the decision pressed upon her, but in that moment, she understood. The crystal shadows were not just a power, they were a part of her, a part of the world. She could feel the pull within her, the desire to unlock their secrets, to bring them back into the light. It was a choice that would change everything. With a steadying breath, Eliana nodded, her voice unwavering. I will restore them, she said, the words tasting like a promise, like a vow to herself, to the world, and to the shadows that had called her here. And with that, the figure before her faded into the darkness, leaving Eliana alone in the strange, swirling space, her heart full of uncertainty, but also of purpose. The journey had only just begun. Eliana's heart raced as the shadows of the figure dissolved into the ever-shifting darkness. The moment it vanished, the world around her seemed to grow still, silent, yet laden with unspoken promise. The only sound that filled the air now was the soft hum of the crystal in her hand, its pulse steady but insistent, as if urging her forward, calling her to embrace her destiny. For a long moment, she stood there, her mind reeling. The words of the figure echoed in her thoughts, a continuous rhythm, a beckoning call she could not ignore. Restore them, it had said. The crystal shadows. She had agreed, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. The weight of the decision pressed upon her, but she couldn't turn back now. Not when she felt this inexplicable pull. This connection to the ancient power that had chosen her. As the silence stretched, Eliana took a deep breath and looked around her. The landscape remained unchanged, an endless expanse of shadowed space, the swirling sky above, and the stone beneath her feet. There was no sign of the figure now, no indication of where it had gone or what it had meant by its cryptic words. It felt as though she were alone, but a part of her knew that wasn't true. The crystal in her hand was warm, almost too warm, and the soft pulse beneath her fingers seemed to guide her steps. With a tentative step forward, Eliana began to walk. The path was uncertain, the destination unclear, but somehow, she felt it was the only path she could take. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of the world itself was being placed on her shoulders. Yet, there was a strange sense of freedom, too, a sense that, in this moment, she was both lost and found, caught between two worlds. The air grew colder as she walked, the light around her dimming even further. The swirling sky above shifted, darkening into deeper hues, like the final moments of dusk before the night fully took hold. But there was something in the air now, something more than just the weight of darkness. It was as if the very space around her was alive, shifting, breathing. The shadows seemed to reach toward her, curling like tendrils, brushing against her skin. But never touching her. It was then that she noticed the change. A flicker, a movement in the distance, like a flash of light, or perhaps a memory. Her eyes narrowed, and she instinctively quickened her pace. As she drew closer, the light became clearer, more distinct. It was a soft, ethereal glow that emanated from the ground itself, like something hidden beneath the stone. It was faint at first, but with each step, it grew stronger, more vibrant, until the very ground beneath her feet was illuminated with a soft, otherworldly radiance. Eliana knelt down, her fingers brushing the stone. There, beneath her touch, she could feel it, a tremor of energy, like a heartbeat. A pulse. Slow and steady, resonating with the rhythm of the crystal in her hand. The two energies seemed to connect, like two long-lost parts of a whole finally reunited, as if in response to her touch, the stone before her cracked open. Slowly, the ground split, revealing a deep crevice from which the glowing light emanated. Eliana's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary crack. The stone seemed to part willingly, as though it had been waiting for her, waiting for the moment when she would reach out and awaken whatever lay within. From the depths of the crevice, something began to rise. At first, it was a faint shimmer, like mist swirling in the dark. But as it emerged, it took shape, slowly. Like a figure being drawn from the shadows. The light grew brighter, casting long, undulating shadows across the stone as the shape solidified. It was not a human form, nor was it something entirely foreign. It was a creature of crystal, its body shimmering with the same ethereal glow as the stone. Its form was serpentine, long and winding, its body made of delicate, translucent facets that caught the light and reflected it in every direction. The creature's eyes, though, were what drew Eliana's attention the most. They were large and round, pools of liquid silver, full of wisdom and ancient sorrow. They seemed to see her, to understand her, in a way that made her feel as though her very soul were laid bare. The creature's mouth opened, and a voice, not the voice of the figure, whispered in her mind, "You have awakened the serpent of the shadows." The words rang through her, deep and resonant, as though they were not spoken but understood, carved into the very fabric of her thoughts. "I am the guardian of the crystal shadows," the creature continued, its voice a soft, melodic hum. "I have been waiting for you, Eliana. Waiting for the one who would awaken the shadows and bring balance to the world." Eliana's pulse quickened, her breath shallow. She had heard the stories, the old legends, of the serpent of the shadows, an ancient being said to protect the secrets of the crystal shadows. The creature was said to hold the knowledge of the world's deepest mysteries, but no one had ever seen it, let alone spoken with it. And yet, here it was, standing before her, its eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her feel as though it were peering into the very heart of her being. "Why me?" Aliena asked, her voice trembling, though she didn't know if it was from fear or something else. Something deeper. The serpent's eyes glinted, its long, crystalline body shimmering as it shifted. "Because you are the last," it said softly, its voice like the sound of wind rustling through the trees. "The last to carry the blood of the ancients. The last to hold the key to the crystal shadows." Aliena's heart pounded. The last. She had always felt different, always known there was something about her that set her apart from the others in the village. But this? This was beyond anything she could have imagined. "What must I do?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She didn't know what she was asking for, but she knew she had to ask. The weight of the crystal in her hand seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, as though it was waiting for her to make her choice. The serpent's gaze softened, and it slithered closer to her, its body winding around the crevice with an elegant, fluid grace. "You must restore the balance, Aliena. You must gather the shards of the crystal shadows and unite them. Only then will you be able to unlock their true power, and release the world from the darkness that has taken hold." Aliena's mind swirled with questions. The shards? She had no idea what the serpent meant, or how she was supposed to accomplish this task. But she knew one thing with certainty: she had no choice but to follow this path. The crystal shadows had chosen her for a reason, and it was a reason she had yet to understand. But the serpent had shown her the first step. With a deep breath, Aliena nodded. "I will do it," and with that, the serpent nodded, its form glowing brighter as if pleased by her decision. Aliena's footsteps were soft but deliberate as she walked through the glowing, pulsating land. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, each one swirling like the shadows around her. The serpent's words echoed in her mind, warning her of what was to come, of the darkness she would have to confront not just in the world, but within herself. The weight of the crystal in her hand had never felt heavier, as though it were both guiding her and bearing down on her, urging her forward into the unknown. The air around her was thick, charged with energy. It was as though the very earth beneath her feet was alive, vibrating with an ancient power that she could feel deep within her bones. Each step she took felt like a moment suspended in time, every footfall resonating with a low hum that seemed to pull at her from all directions. But even as the land seemed to beckon her forward, Aliena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. There was no one else around, at least, not that she could see, but the sensation of eyes on her was unmistakable. She had the distinct impression that the shadows themselves were alive, observing her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. She quickened her pace, though her heart still beat in a steady rhythm, the pulse of the crystal synchronizing with her own. After what felt like hours, the landscape began to shift once more. The glowing stones beneath her feet faded, replaced by a thick fog that crept up around her, swallowing the path ahead. The air grew colder, and the once familiar hum of energy became muffled, as if something was trying to drown it out. Aliena stopped in her tracks, instinctively clutching the crystal tighter. This was it. The Verloren Wald, the Lost Forest. The stories she had heard as a child flashed in her mind. They spoke of a place where time itself had bent and broken, a place where the shadows were thick enough to devour a person whole. But the serpent had told her to go there, to face whatever lay within. It was the only way forward. She breathed deeply and stepped into the mist. At first, it seemed harmless enough, just a cool, thick fog that clung to her skin, making the air feel damp and heavy. But the deeper she went into the forest, the more unsettling it became. The trees, if they could even be called trees, towered above her, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, their bark smooth and pale, almost translucent. The mist wrapped itself around them, curling in strange, spiraling patterns, as though it was alive, as though it were trying to guide her, or mislead her. Eliana's eyes darted nervously from side to side. There was no sound in the forest. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just silence, a deep, oppressive quiet that made her feel small and insignificant. Yet, the deeper she ventured, the more certain she became that she wasn't truly alone. The shadows seemed to shift with her every movement. As if something, or someone, was moving just beyond the veil of the mist, following her, waiting. It was then that she felt it, a faint tug, as though someone, or something, was pulling at the crystal. The pulse in her hand became more intense, faster, urging her onward. Her body obeyed, moving without thought, her feet carrying her through the thickening fog, guided by an invisible force, and then, the fog began to clear. The mist lifted just enough for her to see a clearing ahead, bathed in an eerie, pale light. The crystal in her hand pulsed stronger than ever before, its glow piercing through the fog like a beacon. Eliana stepped forward cautiously, her senses heightened. Her every nerve alive with anticipation. In the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, ancient and worn by time, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer and move with a life of their own. Upon the pedestal lay a shard of crystal, its shape jagged and uneven, yet unmistakably beautiful. The shard shimmered with a soft, otherworldly light, almost as though it were calling to her, drawing her in. But as Eliana approached the pedestal, a low growl reverberated through the clearing. The sound was deep and guttural, coming from somewhere in the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat, and her eyes darted to the edges of the clearing, searching for the source of the sound. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, its form barely discernible against the mist. Its eyes glowed like embers, burning with an unnatural light as they fixed on Eliana. The growl deepened, the figure taking a step forward, its presence suffocating. "You should not be here," the figure hissed, its voice echoing with 1,000 unspoken threats. "The shard is not for you." Eliana's grip on the crystal tightened. The figure moved closer, its form becoming more solid, revealing a creature made entirely of shadow and mist. Its body seemed to flow like liquid darkness, tendrils of smoke twisting and coiling around it. "I have no choice," Eliana whispered. More to herself than to the creature. "The serpent told me to find it," the figure laughed, a harsh, echoing sound that sent a chill down her spine. "The serpent," it mocked. "The serpent is but a lie, a trick of the light. You think you can control the shadows? That you can control the power of the crystal shadows? Foolish child, The mist around them thickened once more, swirling violently, but Eliana stood her ground. She could feel the crystal pulsing in her hand, its energy now vibrating with a force that she couldn't ignore. She wasn't sure what it was doing, but she felt a deep connection to it, a bond that she couldn't break, even if she tried. "I don't know what you are," she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine, "but I won't let you stop me." The figure's eyes flared, its body twisting, and it lunged at her with an unearthly speed. The world around Eliana seemed to blur as she raised the crystal in front of her, instinctively, hoping it would protect her. The moment the shard met the air before her, a brilliant light erupted from the crystal, filling the clearing with a blinding glow. The creature screeched, recoiling from the light as if it were being burned. In that instant, Eliana understood. The crystal wasn't just a key, it was a weapon. A weapon she could wield, and a force she could command. The creature stumbled back, its form flickering as the light from the crystal pushed it further into the shadows. "You cannot defeat me, child," it snarled, its voice fading as it retreated into the mist. "But you have been warned." With a final flicker, the creature vanished, leaving Eliana alone once more. Her breath was heavy, her pulse racing, but the crystal in her hand continued to glow steadily, as if reassuring her that she was on the right path. She turned back toward the pedestal, where the shard of crystal still lay, waiting for her. She reached out, her fingers brushing the shard's cool surface. As her touch made contact, the light from the crystal surged through her, and in that instant, Eliana knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Eliana stood motionless, her hand still hovering over the shard as the light from the crystal enveloped her. It was as though time itself had paused. The pulse of energy from the shard surged through her, filling her with an overwhelming warmth that spread from her fingertips to the deepest corners of her soul. For a fleeting moment, everything around her seemed to fade, leaving only the connection between herself and the crystal. The world slowly began to reassemble around her. The mist still clung to the edges of the clearing, the trees whispering with the breeze, but Eliana was no longer afraid. The crystal's energy had ignited something within her, a power she had never known existed. She gripped the shard more firmly, her thoughts clearer than ever. The crystal wasn't just a key, it was a part of her, a fragment of a greater whole. She could feel it in her bones, in the very essence of her being. It was calling to her, urging her onward, but she knew she wasn't ready. There was still so much she didn't understand, so many questions left unanswered. The clearing around her remained eerily quiet, the silence hanging thick in the air. But as she stood there, staring at the shard in her hand, she could feel the pull of something deeper, something ancient. The forest around her seemed to whisper, as if trying to tell her something important, something she had yet to realize. Her mind flashed back to the serpent's words, "The first shard is hidden in the depths of the lost forest. The shadows of time guard it, but it will not reveal itself easily." Eliana exhaled, her breath steady. She had already faced the first trial, confronting the shadowy creature that had tried to stop her. But now, she understood that there was more at play here. The crystal had chosen her for a reason, and she had to trust that reason, even if she didn't fully comprehend it. Turning, she made her way toward the pedestal where the shard had rested. As her fingers brushed the surface of the stone, a low hum began to reverberate through the clearing. The sound grew louder, vibrating in her chest. until the entire pedestal seemed to come alive. The air shifted, thickening again, and the faintest hint of light appeared at the edge of the mist. Aliana turned back to the clearing, her gaze scanning the shifting shadows. The crystal's glow grew stronger, its light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her eyes caught a sudden movement at the edge of the forest. The shadows seemed to move in strange patterns, twisting and turning as if searching for something, or someone. Before she could react, a figure stepped into the clearing, emerging from the mist like a phantom. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark robes that billowed around them, their face hidden in the shadows of their hood. The only thing visible were their eyes, glowing faintly, like distant stars. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their every step silent as if they didn't truly touch the ground. Aliana's pulse quickened. The figure was no ordinary person. There was an aura of power and danger surrounding them, something ancient and unyielding. "You should not have come here, Aliana," the figure said, their voice a soft, melodic whisper that seemed to echo in the stillness. "The lost forest does not take kindly to trespassers." Aliana's heart skipped. They knew her name. How could they know her name? "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaky but determined. She instinctively raised the crystal in her hand. Its light flaring slightly in response to the tension in the air, the figure tilted their head, their glowing eyes narrowing. "I am someone who has watched over the lost forest for many ages. I have seen those who seek the crystal shadows come and go. Most fail, lost to time, consumed by the forest's darkness. Then why don't you stop me?" Aliana challenged, stepping forward, her grip tightening on the crystal. The warmth from it radiated through her, a constant reassurance that she was on the right path. Despite the threat looming before her, the figure gave a soft laugh, low and eerie. "I do not stop those who are chosen, child. But the forest itself will test you. The first shard is just the beginning. The true challenge lies in what comes after." Aliana's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" The figure took a slow step forward, their form becoming clearer in the dim light. "You will find the second shard soon enough, but it is not the shard you must fear. It is the darkness you will have to confront, within yourself, as well as in the world around you." The serpent's words were not just a prophecy, they were a warning. Aliana's mind raced. She had known this journey would not be easy, but the weight of the figure's words felt like a heavy cloak settling around her shoulders. The shadows in the forest seemed to pulse with an almost malicious intent, as if they were alive, hungry for something, or someone. "And what if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's gaze softened slightly, their eyes glowing with a strange, sorrowful light. "Failure is not the end, Aliana. It is merely another beginning. The crystal shadows do not offer salvation. They offer power, power to those who can withstand the darkness. The rest are consumed." Aliana stood frozen, the weight of the figure's words pressing down on her. She had come this far, but now she realized that the true test had only just begun. The crystal she held in her hand, this powerful, ancient shard, was not a gift, but a challenge, one that would force her to confront her deepest fears. The figure seemed to sense her hesitation. "Do not let the shadows take you. You must leave this place before it is too late. The forest is waking. You must move quickly." Aliana hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the shard in her hand. She couldn't turn back now, not after everything. She had come too far to let fear stop her. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice firm, resolute. The figure nodded once, a knowing look in their glowing eyes. "Very well. But remember this, the path you choose is not the one you are destined for. It is the one you carve for yourself." Without another word, the figure turned and melted into the mist, vanishing from sight as if they had never been there. Eliana stood alone in the clearing, the weight of the figure's words lingering in the air. The shadows of the forest seemed to close in around her once more, the mist thickening until she could barely see the path ahead. But she knew that she had no choice but to continue. She wasn't just searching for the shards anymore. She was searching for herself, and the forest, the crystal shadows, would be her trial. The mist seemed to close in tighter around Eliana as she stood in the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest. The strange, sorrowful figure had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only its cryptic words. "The path you choose is not the one you are destined for. It is the one you carve for yourself." The forest had fallen eerily silent once again, the oppressive quiet pressing down on her like a weight. The shadows that had been swirling around her moments before seemed to pause, waiting, watching, as if the very trees held their breath in anticipation of her next move. Eliana could feel the eyes of the forest on her, their gaze both distant and near, an ancient presence that had been watching over this place for longer than she could imagine. She glanced down at the shard in her hand. Its light had dimmed slightly, but it still pulsed with a steady rhythm, as if echoing the beat of her heart. The warmth she felt from it had not faded, though now it seemed more like a subtle fire, a reminder of the power within her reach. She couldn't afford to be afraid, not now, not when so much depended on what she did next. Taking a deep breath, she turned back toward the dense mist that stretched endlessly before her. The path was unclear, obscured by the swirling fog that seemed to pulse in time with the forest's heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the depths of this labyrinthine forest, was the second shard. But she knew it wouldn't come easily. And the forest would make her prove herself first. The first shard had been a test of courage, a trial to see if she was truly worthy of the power the crystal offered. But now, the real test was beginning. Eliana could feel it in the air, a shift in the atmosphere, as if the forest itself was preparing to strike. As she walked, the ground beneath her feet began to change. The soft earth that had supported her earlier became harder, the stones jagged and uneven, forcing her to tread carefully. She could feel the change in the air as well. Something was different now, darker. The mist, once cold and indifferent, now seemed to curl around her like tendrils, tugging at her, as though trying to pull her deeper into the forest's embrace. The shadows around her stretched unnaturally long, their dark forms twisting like serpents in the corners of her vision. It was as if the forest itself had become alive, aware of her presence, eager to challenge her. Eliana paused for a moment, allowing the crystal to guide her. She held it up, the faint light growing brighter in the thickening gloom. The glow illuminated her surroundings, but only just enough to make out the twisted trees and uneven ground. She could hear a faint rustling in the distance, and instinctively, her hand gripped the crystal tighter. She wasn't alone. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady but laced with tension. For a long moment, there was no response. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the distant shadows. And then, from the edges of the mist, a figure emerged. It was a woman, tall and slender, cloaked in robes that seemed to shimmer with the faintest trace of starlight. Her face was hidden beneath a hood, but her presence was undeniable, her form almost otherworldly. She moved through the mist with an eerie grace, her footsteps silent against the ground. Aliana tensed, her hand still clutching the crystal. The woman's eyes, glowing with a pale, silvery light, met hers from beneath the hood. "You seek the second shard," the woman said, her voice soft and melodious, but with an underlying sharpness. Like the edge of a blade, Aliana nodded, though a sense of unease gripped her heart. "I do. But I won't leave without it. I need it." The woman's gaze softened slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. "You believe you need it, but what you need is far more than just a shard of crystal. The shadows are not your enemies here, Aliana. The true enemy lies within you." Aliana's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, her robes rustling softly as she moved, her glowing eyes never leaving Aliana's. "I am one of the guardians of this place. The shadows are not the creatures you fear, they are a reflection of your own inner turmoil, your struggles, your darkness. The second shard is not a prize to be won, it is a key to unlocking the truth that you have long kept buried." Aliana felt a shiver run down her spine. The woman's words struck a chord deep within her, as though they had touched upon something she had long tried to ignore. She had been running from her past, from the fears that had haunted her for years, but now, in this dark, oppressive place, it was impossible to escape. The shadows were not just around her, they were inside her. "Why are you telling me this?" Aliana asked, her voice barely a whisper. She had come here seeking answers, but now, the answers she was being given only left her with more questions. The woman smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "Because you must understand, child. You cannot continue this journey without first confronting what lies within you. The second shard will only reveal itself when you face the darkness inside your own heart. Only then will you be ready to wield the power of the crystal shadows." Aliana's mind raced. Was this some sort of test? Had the forest known all along that she was not ready? That she had more to learn before she could unlock the power she sought? The woman's gaze deepened, her eyes locking onto Aliana's. "I cannot show you the way forward. You must walk it alone. But remember this, the shadows are not your enemy, Aliana. They are your reflection. Embrace them, and the second shard will reveal itself." With those final words, the woman turned and vanished into the mist, her form melting away like smoke, leaving Aliana standing alone in the silence. The weight of her words settled heavily on Aliana's chest. She could feel the shadows around her closing in again, but this time, she didn't feel the overwhelming fear she had once felt. The darkness wasn't something to run from, it was something to face. Aliana closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had come this far. She had already faced the creatures of the forest, the shadows that had tried to claim her, and now, she had to face the most terrifying thing of all, herself. She opened her eyes and looked into the mist once more. The path ahead was unclear, but she could feel the pull of the second shard, waiting for her, calling her to confront the darkness within. The mist began to thicken around Eliana once more, as though the forest itself had decided to close in on her, narrowing her path. She felt the weight of the woman's words echoing in her mind. The shadows are not your enemy, Eliana. They are your reflection. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest whisper of something unknown, something old. The darkness that surrounded her felt more alive now, as though it were not just an absence of light, but a presence all its own. Eliana closed her eyes, steadying herself. She knew that the path she was on was no longer just about finding the shards, it was about facing something far more profound. The forest was not just a place of danger, but a mirror to her own soul. The shadows weren't simply obstacles to overcome, they were parts of her that she had long ignored, parts that she had to face if she ever hoped to move forward. But how? How could she confront something so vast and intangible? Her mind raced with doubts, with questions. She had always felt like there was a darkness inside her, a part of her that she couldn't understand. The forest seemed to be amplifying it, turning it into something physical, something that reached out to pull her into the depths. The pulse of the crystal in her hand felt like a steady rhythm, a reminder that she was not alone in this. She could feel its warmth, its presence like a silent companion, offering her strength. But even that strength felt fragile, like it might shatter under the weight of what was ahead. Eliana looked ahead, toward the path that stretched into the unknown. The shadows around her twisted, almost beckoning her forward. There was something in the distance, a faint glow, barely perceptible through the thickening mist. It called to her, a quiet pull, like a whisper on the wind. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her footsteps muffled against the soft, uneven ground. The farther she moved, the denser the fog became, until the air was so thick that it felt like she was moving through water. The glow ahead was closer now, though still distant, and the shadows around her seemed to stretch longer, creeping up from the forest floor like tendrils of smoke. Her heart began to race again as she pressed on. The glow was becoming more distinct, more real. It pulsed in the same rhythm as the crystal in her hand. She could feel it resonating deep within her chest, an echo of something far older, something that had been waiting for her. She was getting closer, then, as if out of nowhere, the mist parted, revealing an ancient stone structure standing in the middle of the clearing. It was unlike anything Eliana had ever seen before, tall, jagged, and covered in strange, intricate carvings. The stone was dark, almost obsidian, and glowed faintly with an inner light, much like the crystal in her hand. At the center of the structure, a pedestal stood, just like the one in the first clearing, but this one was more imposing, carved from the same dark stone and radiating an unsettling energy. Eliana hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. She could sense that whatever happened next would change everything. The shadows around her seemed to dance, moving with an almost sentient grace. There was no turning back now. The shard was here, waiting for her, but she knew it wasn't just another fragment of crystal. It was a test. Taking a step forward, she approached the pedestal. The glow from the crystal in her hand intensified as she neared the stone structure. She could feel the energy of the pedestal, pulsing in harmony with her heartbeat. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, almost like blood. As she reached out to place the crystal on the pedestal, the shadows surged. They twisted violently, like a storm of darkness, and for a moment, the clearing around her seemed to warp and bend. The mist seemed to churn, thick and oppressive, until it became impossible to see anything except the ever-expanding shadow that surrounded her. Eliana's pulse quickened, and she instinctively stepped back, clutching the crystal tightly to her chest. The shadows seemed to press in from all sides, enveloping her in their cold embrace. She could hear them now, whispering in a language she couldn't understand, their voices like 1,000 murmurs all speaking at once, filling her mind with thoughts that weren't her own. "You are afraid," the shadows whispered. "You always have been." Eliana shook her head, pushing against the sensation, trying to keep her thoughts clear. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. But the shadows didn't relent. "You cannot hide from yourself," they hissed. "You have always known the truth. It is inside you." Eliana's breath caught in her throat. She knew that the shadows were right, that this moment had been building since she had first set foot in the forest. The darkness inside her had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. And now, that moment had arrived. The shadows grew thicker, more oppressive, until it felt like the very air itself was closing in on her. The crystal in her hand grew warmer, its pulse now matching the frantic beat of her heart. She could feel the energy from it surging, a desperate call to action, but the shadows seemed to suffocate the light. Eliana squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the pressure of the moment weighing heavily on her. She had to face it. The darkness, the fear, the anger that had always been there, she could no longer run from it. The forest had shown her that. With a deep breath, she lifted the crystal high above her head, the light from it piercing through the mist like a beacon. The shadows recoiled for a moment, hissing in frustration, but the light from the crystal only grew stronger. Eliana's heart was still pounding, but now, it was no longer fear that filled her, it was determination. "I will not be consumed by you," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "I will not let you take me." The shadows writhed and twisted around her, but the light from the crystal cut through them, pushing them back. Inch by inch. Eliana's grip on the crystal tightened as the energy within it surged, the warmth now spreading through her entire body. The more she focused, the more the shadows seemed to recoil, until finally, they began to dissipate, fading into nothingness, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, the clearing fell silent again. The shadows were gone. The mist parted, and the pedestal before her glowed brighter than ever. Eliana lowered the crystal, staring at it in disbelief. She had done it. She had faced the darkness, for the first time in what felt like forever. The weight that had pressed down on her heart lifted. She could breathe again, but even as the mist cleared, a new feeling settled in. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. The second shard had revealed itself, but there were still more trials ahead. The forest would continue to test her, to challenge her, until she had learned what she needed to know. But now, Eliana understood something she hadn't before. The true power of the crystal shadows wasn't in the shards themselves. It was in the strength to face the darkness within and emerge victorious. She stepped forward, placing the crystal on the pedestal. The second shard began to glow brighter, its light merging with the light from her own crystal. Together, they hummed with a power that felt like it could shake the very earth. Eliana stood in the clearing. Her heart steady, her mind clear. The path ahead was still shrouded in mist, but she was ready for whatever came next. The light from the crystal hung through Aliana's fingertips, casting long, wavering shadows on the stone pedestal beneath her. The second shard had embedded itself within the ancient stone, merging seamlessly with the first, creating a surge of energy that vibrated through the very air around her. The shadows that had plagued her moments ago had dissipated, leaving behind an unsettling calm. The forest seemed to breathe, its ancient presence now less threatening, more like an observer, watching her every move. Aliana stood still, her heart still racing from the intensity of what had just transpired. The weight of the darkness she had faced seemed to linger in the air, like an echo of the battle she had fought within herself. The clearing had returned to its eerie tranquility, but she could feel that something had changed, something that wasn't visible to the eye but was undeniably present. It was as though the forest had allowed her to pass through a veil, a threshold, and what lay beyond was unknown, yet it called to her, gently but persistently. She reached for the pendant around her neck, the one her grandmother had given her all those years ago. The familiar coolness of the metal beneath her fingers steadied her thoughts. Her grandmother had always told her that there were some things that could only be understood through experience. That wisdom came not just from knowledge, but from facing the unknown. Aliana had always wondered what her grandmother meant, but now, as she stood in the heart of this ancient, living forest, she felt a deep understanding begin to bloom in her chest. The shadows that had once seemed so terrifying were no longer just obstacles, they were part of the journey. They were her journey. With the second shard now secured in place, the pedestal began to glow more brightly, the light cascading outward in gentle waves. The air around her shimmered as if the forest itself was coming alive with this newfound power. Aliana felt a rush of warmth and light, but it wasn't overwhelming, it was grounding. Like the earth itself had opened up to embrace her. Still, she knew that the true test wasn't in the shards or the light that emanated from them. It was in the path that lay ahead, beyond this moment. The forest had given her no clear direction, no easy way forward. The mists that had parted now swirled again, like a living thing, weaving together in complex patterns as they seemed to stretch deeper into the unknown. Aliana's grip on the crystal tightened once more. She had to keep going. She couldn't turn back, not now, not after everything she had faced. The forest had become both a guide and a test, a living reflection of her own heart. The path was still unclear, but she knew that she had to continue. There was more to discover. More to learn. As she stepped away from the pedestal, a faint sound reached her ears, like the distant murmuring of a river, gentle yet insistent. The sound was coming from deeper within the mist, from the direction she had not yet ventured. It was not a typical sound of the forest, there was something haunting about it, something that tugged at her heart. The forest was not just alive, it was speaking to her, calling her to follow. With the crystal glowing steadily in her hand, she took her first step forward. The mist parted before her, swirling away to reveal a winding path that had previously been hidden, as though it had only just been revealed to her eyes. The path was narrow, but clear, and it led toward a thicket of ancient trees, their twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal hands. The air seemed to grow cooler as she entered the shadowed space beneath their boughs. Her feet crunched softly on the dry leaves that littered the ground, but the silence was thick, almost suffocating. There was a weight to the air, a pressure she could not explain, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The path ahead seemed to stretch on endlessly, and though she had never been here before, Eliana had the distinct feeling that this was the heart of the forest, that she was walking its very soul. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees grew taller, their bark thick and blackened, twisted into grotesque shapes. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic, almost like the faint scent of blood. But it was not the scent that held her attention. It was the quiet. There were no birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if all life had abandoned this part of the forest. Then, in the distance, she saw it, a flicker of light. A pale, silver glow that cut through the darkness like a beacon. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, steady and insistent, like a promise. The second shard had called her here, but it was not the only thing that waited in the depths of the forest. Eliana quickened her pace, drawn toward the light. The path ahead seemed to narrow, the trees pressing in tighter with every step. The light grew brighter with each passing moment, illuminating the path ahead in a soft, ethereal glow. It was beautiful, yet haunting, like something ancient and forgotten, lost to time. As she neared the source of the light, she saw that it was not just a single source, it was a collection of lights, all swirling in a dance that seemed to defy the laws of nature. The lights were like floating orbs, each one shining with a pale, crystalline glow. They floated in the air, moving in intricate patterns, circling around one another like celestial bodies locked in orbit. Eliana reached out, her fingers brushing against one of the glowing orbs. The moment she touched it, the orb pulsed, and a wave of warmth washed over her. She felt her mind open, her thoughts becoming clearer, more focused. The orb vibrated softly in her hand, and for a brief moment, Eliana felt as if she were connected to something far greater than herself, something ancient, timeless, and filled with knowledge. And then, in an instant, everything shifted. The lights that had once danced so gracefully began to tremble, as though something dark was pressing in on them. The air grew heavier, and the mist thickened once more, swirling around her with renewed intensity. The ethereal glow of the orbs flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. As though alive, Eliana's heart pounded in her chest. Something was wrong. The peaceful aura of the forest had been shattered. The orb in her hand grew colder, its glow dimming as a dark presence filled the space around her. It was as if the forest had shifted, revealing a hidden truth, a darkness that had been lurking beneath the surface all along, and now, it was waking. The mist thickened again, swirling around Eliana like a living thing. Her breath quickened, the cold air seeping into her lungs, mingling with the weight of the growing darkness that pressed in from all sides. The light from the orbs dimmed, their glow flickering as though struggling against an unseen force. The warmth she had once felt, the comforting embrace of the crystal's power, now seemed distant, as if fading into the shadows. Eliana gripped the orb in her hand tighter, the once soft glow now sharp and jagged against her skin. She could feel the pressure of something darker, something ancient and suffocating, pushing in around her. It was as if the very fabric of the forest was tearing, revealing something buried beneath its surface, something that had lain dormant for centuries. The orbs began to tremble in the air, their movements frantic, as if they, too, were aware of the impending danger. The shadows at the edges of the clearing seemed to twist, warping and shifting, stretching toward her like fingers reaching out from the depths of some ancient nightmare. The once peaceful forest had become a place of foreboding, its trees now looming like silent sentinels, their twisted branches casting long, skeletal shadows across the path. Aliana took a step back, her senses heightened. She could feel the ground beneath her feet shifting, as if the earth itself was trembling in fear. The light from the orb she held flickered wildly, barely clinging to life. Her pulse thundered in her ears, the sound of it blending with the strange, almost imperceptible hum that filled the air around her. It was a noise she couldn't place, a low, vibrating frequency that seemed to reverberate from deep within the earth. She wasn't alone, the thought struck her with a jolt. And she spun around, eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. There was something in the mist, something moving just beyond the edge of her vision. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, a fleeting shape that could have been a trick of the light. But then it moved again, more distinctly, and Aliana felt a chill run down her spine. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and cloaked in shadows. Its features were hidden beneath a dark hood, its presence oppressive and unnerving. It stood still for a moment, as if observing her, its form blending seamlessly with the darkness around it. Aliana's grip tightened around the orb, and she instinctively took a step back. Her pulse raced. Her breath shallow, as the figure took another step forward, its movement slow and deliberate. "You are not welcome here," a voice echoed from the figure, low and resonant. It was not a voice that came from a person, but from something far older, something that had been lying in wait for this very moment. Aliana's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in place, staring at the figure. It spoke again, its words coming like a whisper on the wind, yet they echoed in her mind with startling clarity. "The forest belongs to the shadows," it said. "And the shadows belong to the past. You are trespassing in a place you cannot understand. Leave now, before it is too late." Aliana could feel the weight of the words settle into her bones. This was no ordinary being, this was a creature of the forest itself, an entity born of its deepest, most ancient layers. The shadowy figure seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its form blurring as if it were made of smoke, a reflection of the mist that surrounded them. "I won't leave," Aliana said, her voice shaky but determined. "I came here for a reason. I have to find the rest of the shards." The figure tilted its head slightly, its hooded face still obscured, but Aliana could feel its gaze like a weight pressing on her. The shadows around it seemed to pulse with energy, as though responding to her defiance. "You do not understand what you seek," it whispered. "The shards are not what you think they are. They are pieces of something far greater, something that cannot be controlled. Their power is ancient, and it is not meant for the likes of you." Aliana's mind raced. What did the figure mean? The shards were supposed to be pieces of the lost crystal, the key to unlocking something important, a power that could restore balance to the world. She had always believed that. But now, with the figure's words echoing in her mind, doubt began to seep in. What if she was wrong? What if this wasn't just a simple quest for power, but something far more dangerous? But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The forest, the shadows, the crystals, they were all tied together in a way that she couldn't yet comprehend. And the figure, whatever it was, couldn't stop her. "I have to continue," Aliana said, her voice stronger now. I won't let fear guide me. I have to know what this means." The figure remained silent, and for a long moment, the forest held its breath. The tension in the air was palpable, thick like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Then, slowly, the figure began to move, its shadowy form melting into the mist as if it had never been there at all. Aliana blinked, her heart still racing, but the figure was gone. She stood alone in the clearing once more, the silence deafening. The air felt heavier now, the forest seemingly closing in around her with renewed intensity. But the orb in her hand began to pulse once more. Its light steady and bright, a beacon in the darkness. Aliana took a deep breath, calming her nerves. The figure was gone, but the forest was still alive, and its whispers were not to be ignored. The path ahead was unclear, but the shards were calling her forward, pulling her deeper into the forest. She couldn't turn back now, not after everything she had learned. The shadows that haunted her were not just obstacles to be avoided, they were part of her journey, part of the truth she needed to uncover. With renewed determination, Aliana continued down the path, the mist swirling around her like a living thing, the glowing orb guiding her every step. The forest had secrets, ancient and dark. But she was no longer afraid. Aliana's footsteps were the only sound in the thick, pressing silence that enveloped her. The orb she carried pulsed rhythmically in her hand, casting a soft glow that illuminated the misty path before her. The forest, once full of life, now seemed like a haunted labyrinth, each step taking her deeper into its ancient heart, a place that held secrets long buried in its shadowed depths. The encounter with the shadowy figure lingered in her mind, its cryptic words echoing in her thoughts. "The shards are not what you think they are." The thought sent a shiver down her spine. For so long, she had believed the shards were fragments of something beautiful, something pure, a tool for healing the rift between the realms of light and darkness. But now, she wondered, could they truly be that innocent? Were they a force beyond her understanding, capable of something far darker than she had ever imagined? The path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, but her resolve remained unshaken. There was no turning back. She had come too far, faced too much, to abandon her quest now. But with each passing step, she couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. The trees seemed to grow denser as she moved forward, their twisted branches looming overhead, blocking out more and more of the pale light from the moon. The mist thickened, swirling around her like a living entity, and for the first time, Aliana realized how quiet the forest had become. The usual sounds, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of distant creatures, had all fallen silent. The forest had become a void, its heart beating with an unnatural stillness. She reached the edge of a clearing, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stood an enormous stone archway, ancient and worn by time, its surface etched with cryptic symbols and runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The archway seemed to pulse with a strange energy, drawing her closer, beckoning her forward. It was as if the very earth itself was urging her to pass through, to step into whatever lay beyond. Aliana hesitated, her fingers tightening around the orb. The energy radiating from the archway was unlike anything she had ever felt, a force both inviting and dangerous. She had no idea what lay on the other side, but she knew that it was an integral part of her journey. She could feel it in her bones. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her feet brushing against the cold stone as she passed beneath the arch. The moment she crossed its threshold, the world around her seemed to shift. The air grew thick with energy, crackling with a power that made her skin tingle. The mist that had surrounded her evaporated, replaced by an eerie stillness. As if the very fabric of the forest had folded in on itself, closing off her path, the space beyond the archway was unlike anything Eliana had seen before. It was as though she had entered another realm, one where time and space twisted in ways that defied logic. The trees around her were impossibly tall, their trunks twisted and gnarled like ancient sentinels. Their branches stretched high into a sky that was not quite night, but not quite day, as though the very essence of twilight had settled here and refused to leave. In the center of this strange landscape, a massive crystal stood, its facets gleaming with an otherworldly light. It was unlike any crystal Eliana had seen before. Its surface shimmered with the colors of 1,000 sunsets, vivid purples, fiery oranges, and deep blues, shifting and changing as if the crystal were alive. The power radiating from it was palpable, a low hum that reverberated in the air around her. As Eliana approached the crystal, her heart began to race. She could feel the shards in her hand reacting to it, the warmth of the first shard growing stronger as if it were drawn to the crystal, longing to be reunited. This was what she had come for, the heart of the forest, the source of the crystal's power. But now that she stood before it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The mist returned, swirling around her like an ever-present specter. She turned quickly, her eyes scanning the eerie landscape. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, as if something was moving just out of sight, watching her every move. The crystal's light flickered, casting long, sharp shadows across the clearing. And then, from the darkness, a voice spoke, soft yet clear, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You have come far, child," the voice said, echoing around her. "But your journey does not end here." Eliana's heart skipped a beat. She knew that voice, though she had never heard it before. It was the same voice that had spoken to her when she first found the shards, the voice that seemed to come from the very depths of the forest. The voice of the forest's ancient power, the voice of the one who guarded its secrets. "You seek to wield the crystal's power," the voice continued, its tone both gentle and firm. "But the price for such power is not one you can afford. The forest will not yield its heart to you so easily." Eliana felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had known this would not be easy, that there would be challenges along the way. But the words of the voice made her doubt herself, made her question if she was truly prepared for the burden that would come with such power. "What is the price?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't want to know the answer, but she had to ask. The crystal's light flickered again, as if acknowledging her question. "The price," the voice whispered, "is your soul." The words struck her like a physical blow. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she fell to her knees, the orb slipping from her grasp and rolling away into the mist. Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. My soul. How could that be? She had come seeking to restore balance, to harness the power of the crystal for good, not for destruction. Why? She gasped, struggling to breathe, the weight of the words pressing down on her chest. Why would you ask such a price? The voice was silent for a long time, the air heavy with the unspoken truth. Then, slowly, it spoke again, its tone tinged with a sorrow that sent chills down her spine, because the crystal's power can only be awakened by one willing to give everything, body, heart, and soul. The shadows that lie beneath this forest, the darkness that sleeps in its roots, can only be controlled by those who understand its true nature. You are not the first to seek its power. Many have tried, and many have failed. Aliana's mind spun, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She had come here to restore the balance, to bring light to the shadows. How could the price be so steep? But there was no turning back now. The crystal was in her grasp. She had already taken the first step. And there was no way to unmake what had been done. She rose slowly to her feet, her eyes locked on the shimmering crystal before her. Her pulse echoed in her ears as she faced the truth. The choice that lay before her was one of sacrifice. To wield the crystal's power would mean giving up everything she was, but was there another way?